So, with that, let's do a quick reshuffle. Those who are staying in the room, we have the principal economist of the European Commission coming up in a moment, so please come to the front. I'd love to see your eyes. You've got beautiful eyes, beautiful faces, so please come to the front if you can. And then we're going to get started with this first keynote. We're going to have panel conversations, keynotes, so much good stuff. So make a decision, stay, go outside. You're welcome. This space is for you, and we want you to benefit and get the greatest value from today. Okay, so let's kick things off. I love what this man had to say. I was watching some of his interviews, and he said this: my preferred scenario is a token economy. That is the emergence of a disintermediated ecosystem of SMEs of all sizes. If you didn't know this, here in the EU, 99% of the businesses are SMEs. That they can interact seamlessly with trading partners, customers, investors in a secure digital environment. Why is he the principal economist? Because he's got a PhD in economics. He's a postdoc research fellow at LSE. He's been at the European Commission since 2001. He is part of the Digital Finance Strategy, September 2020. There's so much on this list here. You're an amazing person, and we're so honored to have you here. Please welcome up the incredible principal economist, Joachim.
So everything's working perfectly. Welcome also from my side. The expert sitting next to me was asking me, who was that guy you were introducing? I don't know, because all of that sounds amazing, but I'm just giving a presentation here. And actually, the merits are to the Liechtenstein team. I say the Liechtenstein team because I truly believe in collectives. I don't think that an individual is much without a collective. And this here is a huge effort done by Thomas, by the team, but also by the government, by Thomas Dünser with the preparation of the Token Act and everyone. This is a joint effort, and everyone here in this building, whatever you are doing at this moment here, you are part of that collective and that space. So thanks very much for having me here and for hosting this. Thomas, my friend, you know me very well, and when you put me on the stage and tell me I should speak 25 minutes on MiCA and the Token Act in Liechtenstein, you know that I'm not going to do that because that's boring. So I will speak 5 minutes on my topic, and I will put the topic into perspective, because that's what you get when you have an economic historian, which I am by trade, and to really tell you a little bit about how we got here, where we might be heading, and why there are certain issues that we need to address now. And in order to start, I would like you to think about the time span of a little bit more than a quarter of a century, 27 years. You might wonder, why 27 years? For me, it's obvious. 27 years ago, in 1995, my football club won its last title. So I know precisely what I did in 1995. I was celebrating, and I can tell you 27 years are a very long time when you're waiting. On the other hand side, 27 years might be something different, and the Prime Minister mentioned it. We have a very joyful example here. 27 years ago, in 1995, Liechtenstein joined the EEA. And when I look at the picture here for the 25-year celebration, everyone seems to be happy, and you see on that picture the really important people in Europe listening attentively to your predecessor. And of course, Liechtenstein has a track record of being very much in the limelight for the achievements, and I'm really looking forward to the continuation of that. Today, 27 years later, we are here in the middle of the token economy. Fantastic event. So I've been to a lot of events, and I don't have the reputation of saying nice things when I don't want to, but this is a superb experience here, and I'm really looking forward to the day. Now let's get into the business, and it might be less appealing. So we had a fantastic introduction so far, and everyone is very cheerful. I might slightly spoil the show. Let's get back to 2008, so basically 14 years ago. And as an economic historian, this is the defining moment, one of the defining moments, certainly, of this century. And I'm not exaggerating. We have a time span here of 6 weeks in the autumn of 2008, when we had the lowest point of the centralized system, which is full of systemic risks. We cannot stop repeating that when we have the traditional financial system in a centralized manner, interdependence of a collection of systemic risks. And the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers epitomizes that in September 2008. And I was at the time saving all these banks. I know precisely what I'm talking about. 6 weeks later, we had the publication of the white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto on Bitcoin. And that is no coincidence. Of course, the details are a coincidence, but the fact that you had the lowest point of an old centralized system and the nucleus of a new decentralized system is a very clear connection in history. And since then, it's only 14 years ago that we have emerged on a journey. And 27 years later, we will be in 2035. And in 2035, there has recently been, to take it just as an example, some scenarios from the Wharton blockchain and digital asset project of what our world might look like in 2035. And I can assure you it is rather depressing to read this. What they have done is they have taken 2 different dimensions. So the traditional and digital assets worlds will be centralized or decentralized. They will be distinct or integrated. And when you look at that, starting perhaps in the top right, the one scenario where everything is integrated and centralized, and we see it in parts of the world already now, is a very problematic, it is a totalitarian, it is a completely undemocratic situation, which we might be facing, we don't know. We have a couple of other scenarios looking into the other spaces, distinct but decentralized, 2 parallel systems. You will be placed in either system, rather confrontative, not much of cooperation, and a big battle from top down on who has the power, also not very appealing. The opposite to that, integrated and decentralized, a lot of failing states. We see increasingly problems in geopolitical terms, etc. And those who can afford it, those who understand it, go somewhere in the metaverse and do their own stuff, and the rest is crumbling. Not appealing to me either. And the 4th dimension is the left bottom corner, where we are essentially, it's my feeling at least from the Brussels perspective, now. We are getting decentralization more and more, hopefully. It is still distinct. We are building bridges. We are looking at interoperability, standardization, lots of issues here. We find that very cumbersome. It's not easy to do. It poses 1,000 practical questions, and in daily practice, it is enervating, I can assure you. But it might be, for the moment, perhaps the best scenario that we can envisage. But it's no guarantee that we will be there. There's a lot out there that is preventing decentralization, democratization, integration from happening. And this is something that we need to address urgently. And 27 years is not a long time, because you can be dead sure when you look at the pace of innovation that now we have the first half of that period behind us and the second half in front of us, although this is, of course, a very arbitrary border, 2035. And perhaps 80% of the innovation we are going to see will happen in that second quarter. It's not only that speed is already high now, it will increase, and that is putting policymakers, that is putting regulators, that is putting everyone in the space in huge challenges, I would say. So that's a little bit a summary of what I just said. And indeed, choices still can and have to be made, but they have to be made now. And it's good to celebrate, it's good to come here together and see how great all of this, and Liechtenstein is a fantastic example of what has been achieved, but there's no guarantee that this will be forever, and it's a daily battle to go along that trajectory. So let's briefly reflect, how have we come here, and where do we go next? And what we know is indeed positive. We know, and that's the bottom line, and whenever someone comes and talks to me about energy consumption and some pockets of fraud and some risk here and there, we need to get down to the bottom line, and the bottom line is opportunities. This space is creating opportunities in all dimensions. And I'm not going in all the details here, I've put it in many presentations. We know that tokenization creates opportunities in finance, that is where it actually emerged. It creates opportunities for industrial ecosystems. Don't even try to read my slides. This is an example from a study we did in 2018 where we looked at prototypical blockchain applications in 9 industrial sectors. At the time, it was science fiction, having drones with blood samples and organs flying around, organized on a blockchain for when an accident is happening to have the right stuff at the right place for the right person. They are flying around in Canada. They are flying around in places in Europe now. The speed of innovation is intense, and also in the other parts, and a lot of that is about integration. So for us, that is really the bottom line, not only finance, but application for people in the real economy. This is one of our current projects. As said, don't try to read that. That is a blockchain infrastructure we are building to detect fake products. We've been working on that for 5 years. It should be operational in 2 years. It will be an open source blockchain space where along all possible value chains in industry where they take an interest, whenever something is produced, even the smallest items, it gets a digital twin. NFTs are being used for the data flow and the trajectory of the time path between the delivery of the product everywhere, and it is being controlled and checked on a blockchain. We had a competition on that earlier this year. We chose the solution. We will have it in Europe. 7% of our imports in Europe are fake products. It's costing billions, and we are using blockchain to address that problem. So whoever says that blockchain is not going to stay here, we are way beyond that point. We are way beyond that point. We are building huge blockchain infrastructures in a decentralized manner according to our data protection rules, according to our policy objectives, and that's a reality. But all of that needs a new approach to governance. And we had a huge discussion yesterday afternoon in a workshop here organized by Thomas Dünser and the team on DeFi, and that's a typical example. I'll come to that at the end of my presentation here. We cannot continue in our policy making and regulation as we've done in the past. In the past, we had a system that was addressed to the legacy system, top down. We had, for example, in banking, capital markets, mature markets, limited numbers of incumbents, few new competitors, slow pace of innovation, and we could afford to have regulation in long cycles. So after a while, you were looking at, shouldn't we upgrade our regulation? 5 years later, 10 years later, you took 3 years, and that's the business I know very well. And then you came to some solution, and that was it. This does not work for the token economy. You need a bottom-up approach because you are faced with emerging markets, hardly any established incumbents, many new competitors, very disruptive innovation for the market, and especially the time factor. I cannot overemphasize the time factor. It outpaces the regulatory cycles very clearly. That doesn't mean that regulation or policy making becomes fully reactive, quite to the contrary, but we need to build co-learning, co-working spaces between the public and the private sector to understand the technology, to know what we are talking about, and then to do the work in a decentralized, open, fluid manner. And these are not just only words. We have a perfect example here today on how this works in practice, and that is indeed the Liechtenstein Token Act. And this is actually the 5 minutes I'm going to speak about my topic. So, rewinding to 2016, and that is 8 years after the Bitcoin white paper. I know you guys know all that stuff, and I know that's perhaps another generation that has a different opinion from speed that I have. But I have been trained as economic historian to think in centuries, to think in millennia. And now we have a new technology here, and after 8 years, Liechtenstein embarks on the token law, starting with the first working group and having it in place, as the Prime Minister said, on the 1st of January 2020. And this is a huge breakthrough. This is a huge breakthrough because it creates, in a very broad and comprehensive manner, an approach that is actually not dependent on very concrete examples, but a very broad example. A token is a piece of information on a trustworthy technology. We're not even speaking of blockchain. We're speaking of trustworthy technologies. We have the token container model, a container loaded with rights of all sorts. I compare it to a logistics company. Just basically, it's a truck that you have been running from the traditional economy to the digital space and back, and whatever is in the truck is not the issue in the first instance. It depends on the context of what you do with that. List of service providers very specifically, and a couple of other principles here that also reach out to other principles of law that are mentioned here. That was a true revolution. Congratulations for that, and that is very well achieved. We did a similar thing. We took a little bit more time, which has mostly to do with the quite complex political process that we have in Europe. But in the same year, year 8 of that calculation, we decided that blockchain is an EU innovation priority. And that was for all policy fields, for all types of innovation, whatever you have in the world out there. We chose 4, and blockchain was one of them. I proposed it at the time. And I proposed it at the time not because cryptocurrencies are so nice, but because blockchain has this huge potential that we see today of bringing benefits to each and every one of you and each of everyone out there. As a public sector, and the Prime Minister said that, we are not there to burn money. We are there to decide on priorities and then help the market to get this on the market and have real benefits to real people. That is why we exist. And this is what we tried to do in this year. And then we engaged on a policy journey that led us in a second to MiCA. And this is a slide I've shown a few times, but it's a different slide because I regularly adapt it. So if some of you have seen it before, still try to read it afterwards. We have put the green light in the political and regulatory terms on the token economy. We started, that's the red part, in a very reactive mode with the financial crisis of saving all these banks and stabilizing the system. Then we had in parallel a couple of initiatives on digital. And then since 2020, we are in a coherent move towards the digital and token economy. We had the digital strategy, the digital finance strategy where MiCA is part from. It was mentioned before. We are currently working and are progressing on that quite a lot on a proposal for a digital, maybe a programmable euro. We are discussing a lot of topics on taxation, data, digital identity, etc. We have a new initiative announced in September on the metaverse. We're working out what that is, but there have been first steps already set. And we might also look into a MiCA 2.0, but on that we haven't taken a decision yet, relating to DeFi, relating to DAOs, relating to a lot of other stuff that might be around. I might address that briefly at the end. So a lot of coherent work, but it is extremely important to stress that the starting point of all of that is data, is identity, is the management on the decentralized level of the data. We are not having a top-down approach like the big techs. We are not having a top-down approach like certain countries that are in the upper right corner of the scenarios that I've mentioned. We take the opposite approach. And in MiCA, and this is my only slide on MiCA because I don't want to bore you with the technical details, I think that MiCA is revolutionary. And I am very honest, I don't really like regulation. I am more sort of entrepreneur kind of type. My colleagues always tell me, and that's not meant in a very positive way, you think like an entrepreneur. Yeah, I think that's what I should do in my job. And therefore, I think regulation comes last and regulation doesn't come first. MiCA has 3 pillars, and it is, forget the details. They're currently in the last stage of finalizing. Might already be over, I don't know. But this is the essence of that, 3 pillars. And the first pillar is the exemption. We have a regulation explaining what is not regulated. And what is not regulated under financial matters is things that have small amounts, is crypto mining, is NFTs, yes, it's DAOs and DeFi, etc. And not because it is too complex or whatever, because rather we think that most of that doesn't really pose problems or it's too early to address that. And there's a lot of discussions at this moment. I just grabbed one example on NFTs, because when you talk to different people, they say you different things. I say NFTs are exempted, because it's written in the articles, it's very clearly. But some people say NFTs might be included. Yes. Why? Because it depends on the functionality. It always depends on the functionality. You cannot say a token is a token is a token, and then you have a general rule on that, but it always depends on the context. When you use an NFT as it is supposed to be, not fungible, really a sort of representation of something unique, in normal circumstances, it will not be regulated. If you use it to back up something with value, to make it transferable, to put it into another context, certain things on service providers apply. So that is a little bit more complicated. That is why there's 170 pages on stuff, but the principle is the one that here, most of the stuff is excluded. Perhaps even more revolutionary is the second pillar, and that's what applies to most crypto assets apart from stablecoins and e-money tokens, and that is relatively light regulation. You send a white paper, not a prospectus, to your regulator, and the regulator has the burden of proof. And he needs to react, but you can already launch. And there are clear legal principles of what a regulator can do, and the moment that you launch, you have a passport for 27 countries plus the EEA. I don't know any other system globally like that. This is a true revolution within financial regulation, that you have this little document that you propose, and then you go through. And that is something that, in our opinion, should be the standard case for tokens. And then, of course, you have the last pillar, which is heavily regulated, but the bottom line of that is it's not prohibited. And at the time we were drafting MiCA, we had a very clear political message from the big governments in Europe: you must prohibit all of this. because of what happened with Libra and stuff like that. And we, as the small regulator, were saying we are not prohibiting it. And then we have all sorts of discussions about democracy, and yes, I fully take that point, and yesterday we had a fully animated discussion of that, but we think it's right not to prohibit anything, but to write clear rules on what you have to do if you want to launch. So that you have decent reserves when you have a stable coin or other stuff. I mean, that should be very clear and a lot of other topics. So I think MiCA is a liberal piece of regulation, and we hope now to get it in place very, very quickly. But it all boils down to education. We would have never achieved coming to MiCA. Liechtenstein would never have achieved to come to the token law if you had not well-educated, knowledgeable people that are in constant dialogue with you, with everyone in the space, with entrepreneurs, with people that know what they're talking about. And this is why education, to me, is the bottom line of all of that. And I was very happy to see yesterday in our DeFi workshop that every 10 minutes someone referred to education. Education is really key, and this applies to regulator and policymakers as well as it does to a lot of people. What next? And I will conclude along these lines. I think I have 3 or 4 slides left and 6 minutes to go, so for my standards, I'm extremely well. One example is programmable money. I spoke a little bit about the digital euro. The digital euro will be a very, very long journey, and I'm not discussing the proposed use case here. A lot of people know what I'm thinking about that, but we urgently need programmable money for businesses, for everyone in the society. We have started in parallel to the exercise with the ECB, an exercise with industry, with banks, with the financial sector in Europe to discuss viable private alternatives to ensure programmable money supply and digital functionalities in the token economy, even if a digital euro in a traditional manner is not available. And this discussion is a very important one. We call the project Tokenize Europe 2025. And I'm very pleased to see that we have very active participants from Liechtenstein. We have Otto Frommelt here, Thomas Dünser, Martina Dünser-Davis, a lot of people involved from Liechtenstein in this discussion, because from the Liechtenstein perspective, they have the knowledge, they know what they're talking about. And that is really something where I would also like to express my gratitude to here, the space in Liechtenstein, for helping us in this very important discussion. And then comes the big elephant in the room, then comes DeFi. So we have already now requests to bring out regulation on DeFi. From whom are these requests coming? They're not from us. I mean, honestly, we are very happy that MiCA is now finalized. We are working on a digital euro. We have an initiative on the metaverse. Our office day has a certain limited number of hours. I'm not too keen on now starting a new regulation on DeFi. But we have the ECB asking for that, which I don't comment. Interesting sentence. The ECB is asking for regulation on DeFi, but also a lot of people in the DeFi space. And that's because they realize that it would be good to have something to offer in that big discussion, because a lot of things are currently hijacked in other discussions, and it would be good to have good examples coming up from the DeFi space. DeFi for me is, let's say, the true thing, because I started after the financial crisis with crowdfunding. We saw crowdfunding as an alternative to the banking system, but crowdfunding never really scaled. For a lot of reasons, it was just there too early. But it set the tone, it set the principles. DeFi is crowdfunding 2.0. DeFi is something huge which can really be helpful and positive to a lot of people, and we see the use cases, we see a lot of benefit, but in the next couple of years, taking aside the energy discussion and a couple of things, DeFi will be the focal point of a next wave of regulation, and it is extremely good that Liechtenstein, after having the token law in place now for 2 years, is very actively engaging on a discussion on future DeFi regulation, and we need that. We need that to have countries in Europe that know what they are doing coming up with good proposals, because that is only how we can also have the input to take good decisions. You cannot leave that to a top-down political approach. You need to do that at your level here. So thank you also very much for this initiative here. Last slide. We are at a very critical junction. So I have the feeling that depression starts to creep into this room, which I want to prevent, because at the end of the day, we have huge achievements. We have a very positive space, but we are really at a critical juncture here, and I know what I'm talking about from the political space. We have all the tools. We have everything ready to develop it, to integrate it, to come to a meaningful digital economy for digital communities that coexist with our physical lives in a daily manner, depending on choices, depending on what you want. This requires decentralized governance structures. where we can reap all the opportunities that I've mentioned. And we can even think, and I love DAOs, I'm working a lot on that, on a DAO type of approach where DAOs become digital communities that might take over quite some functions of borderless digital states with all the implications thereof, and there's a lot of interesting governance models out there. But the big threat comes from three directions. That comes from the centralized authorities. Remember the picture on the 4 scenarios. All the top-down approaches will not work the way that we want to develop this space, but they are gaining ground globally. Second, we have the big techs. Investing alone in 2021, $300 billion into developing the metaverse. And that is something where I'm hugely concerned. I spent 20 years on competition policy as my job, and I know what this means. And whatever comes with a big tech head on it, whatever comes from that Web 2.0 line is not decentralized, is not DeFi. But that is not the metaverse. But that is, of course, where a lot of people will move to because it will be easy. And then, and I'm sorry to say that, we have also the arrogance of part of the decentralized space that just don't care about what anyone thinks. They are seemingly living in a digital planet that is out of our solar system. And this is very concerning because at the end of the day, we had a discussion of, yeah, you cannot prohibit that. You cannot prohibit Bitcoin. You cannot prohibit anything else. But you can really create harm to individuals that engage in the space if you can grab them. And I know that for many reasons. For AML reasons, for other reasons, they will find something that will apply. And therefore, you need a dialogue with the old world to get the two things together, to build the bridges that I tried to show at the beginning, to have a joint movement towards a meaningful decentralized space. This is why we are here today. And this is where I would love every one of you, wherever you go today, what you discuss in your meetings, to think about whatever little contribution you can make to bring the two parts together, to be integrative and not dividing, and to help us develop the space at the political level. 7 seconds to go. I've never been that much on time, so thank you very much for your attention and looking really forward to the day.